Former Prime Minister Theresa May is stepping down as an MP at the upcoming general election. Now, I think it is fair to say that her premiership was highly contentious, marked by a failure to secure a Brexit deal. Her tenure as Home Secretary was even more contentious after the Windrush scandal. When the Tory party turned on Theresa May, her fellow MP, Amber Rudd, said the way she'd been treated by a, quote, group of men inside the Conservative Party had a whiff of sexism around it. So, let's explore that idea over the coming hour. How will Theresa May's career be judged by history? And will that career be judged more harshly because she was a woman? For my part, I have very mixed feelings about Theresa May's political career. I've heard people all week entirely write off her tenure as Prime Minister. While I think she was an extremely poor leader, I also think she has been more harshly judged because she was a woman who couldn't control the hard Brexiteers in her party, most of whom were men, including Boris Johnson, who spent most of his time attempting to stab her in both the back and the front. The list of her failures are long. As PM, she failed to secure a workable Brexit deal. She also failed to surround herself with advisers who were remotely wise. Having campaigned for Remain, she failed to stick by her guns. And when PM, she decided to become an evangelical proponent of Brexit, a policy that has cost this country billions. As Home Secretary, she created a hostile environment for immigrants, depriving thousands of Britons of their basic rights. She also presided over the Windrush scandal, an absolute stain on the history of this country. However, there were other things that she did that were very different to men. And I think we should acknowledge that. After most of the blokes kicked her out of the Tory party, she didn't just run away. She decided to stay as an MP in the Commons and work as a constituency MP. In an interview, she expressed her very deep regret over Windrush. She said had she known what the impact was, she wouldn't have done it. Her work on modern slavery laws has put the UK streets ahead of other European counterparts in protecting women, modern slaves, especially women and children. Her domestic abuse legislation extended laws to protect more women. It was unprecedented. And it was her that personally championed it. She openly criticised Boris Johnson, unafraid of what other members of the Tory party said. So how will Theresa May's career be judged by history? And will it be judged more harshly because she was a woman? How do you think history will judge her?
I thought your introduction was very fair, and it definitely is going to be a mixed bag. I mean, I am quite often told that it's because of me in my court case that I ended her premiership, which is...
Well, it was only a contributory factor, wasn't it?
It was a contributory factor because of, attempting to put herself above the law, which was, a poor judgment on her part, but also on the part of her advisors. But it's very complex being a woman in politics, actually being the woman in the top of any organisation, or be it in public or private, because you are unfortunately still these days judged very harshly. And the thing is with Theresa May, unfortunately, I don't think she had the force of character, even though she's an incredibly hardworking individual. And I know that from the work she did on modern-day slavery bill, because I was part of that work when I was at the Centre for Social Justice. So, I have all admiration for the fact that she pushed through that legislation. But when it came to Brexit, she was being bullied relentlessly by people in her own party on actually the Remain side and the Leave side. And she, the men were disgraceful. And I do know that because I know what was happening behind the scenes. So to be bullied the way she was, and I say, the people who believed in Remain and believed that it was wrong for us to leave should have actually rallied around her and given her their support. And they didn't do that. They all ran away. So, the men who should have been there supporting her were not there. She stuck it out and they ran away. But the fact is, she is also somebody who showed poor judgment when it came to Windrush, and when you said what happened at the Home Office, and things like choosing, Chris Grayling as being Minister for Transport. Yes. She made poor judgments, but at the same time, she did things I don't think the men would have done, because, as you quite rightly said, she pushed the covers of the legislation on domestic violence. I'm a survivor of domestic violence, and for years and years and years, we wanted those reforms to be brought in, and as a woman, she pushed that and she absolutely championed it. And I'm not sure that men would have done that or had talked about it, but weren't actually doing the actions to push that through.
Agreed.
So there were female parts of her. I think as a woman, she stood up for women, which is not something her previous a female Prime Minister for Conservatives had done. Mrs. Thatcher did not stand up for women. So I'd say from that point of view, she was a good female advocate in public life. But the challenges she had to face with the men in the party, the bullying and the poor advisors, and therefore some of the choices she made, will not sit well in history because they were very poor choices.
Gina, stay there. I'm going to bring Dawn Butler back into the conversation. Dawn Butler, Labour MP for Brent Central, who've managed to get back on the line. Dawn, you just heard what Gina said there, and I think it was very fair. Do you were just about to tell us what your interactions with Theresa May were like, and I suppose I want to focus with you on integrity. Do you think she was a woman that had integrity?
I think I would agree with Gina that she had poor judgment and also poor advisors, and I think that's a lesson to, all prime ministers, that you have to make sure that you have good advisors around you. So I think that, she did so much harm and damage, but I suppose with all of us, not everything was bad. But what I think she should do now, before she leaves, is she should work hard to right the wrong. She should work hard to make sure that there is compensation for the Windrush scandal, that is independent of the government and the Home Office, because the Home Office is not equipped to do that, to administer it. So I think that should be her legacy, that she should right that wrong before she leaves.
Interesting. The question was, Dawn, about integrity, and the reason I'm asking you that is because of what happened after she was pushed out of the premiership and the disaster, in my view, of leadership we've had subsequently. Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, ever more extreme Home Secretaries. Compared to all of that, do you think she was somebody that perhaps was one of the last Conservative MPs to display a bit of integrity? Maybe
a bit of humanity, and you have to think that where we're judging it from is a pretty sort of low bar, isn't it? Where we're judging it from, yes. And the next Home Secretary was, when you say have I had interactions with her, I mean, Suella's essentially dead behind the eyes, so it's a pretty kind of low bar, but. Did she have integrity? I think it's been very brave of her to sit in Parliament and participate in debates. Yeah. When Boris Johnson was no longer a member of Parliament, he didn't come back to Parliament. He travelled around the country going on holidays and making millions of pounds. She still made millions of pounds, but at least you see her in Parliament. And I kind of think that's pretty brave of her.
Dawn Butler, Labour MP for Brent Central. I know we have to let you go. Please say that Gina Miller is still with us, leader of the True and Fair Party. Gina, you said something very interesting. You said that you saw her, Theresa May, being bullied relentlessly by men in her party, both Remainers and Brexiteers. Do you think that an element of that was because she was a woman?
Oh, I think the bullying in Parliament is sadly there every day, and the women in Parliament who even now, after not just Theresa May, I mean even Dawn, it is a misogynistic boys' club in Parliament. And because of that, in 2019, we saw a significant number of women standing down. And I think we're seeing it again. And that's what's so disappointing about our politics, is that we need good people in politics, including good women in politics, to stand up, as Theresa has done for female issues, but actually to bring humanity into our politics. And I am very, very concerned. I actually did not think she would stand down because she's been such an effective backbencher. Her seat is fairly safe. I think it is definitely safe. But for her to step down, I think says more about the soul of the Conservative Party and where that is going. And she is a number of people who actually I do think have principles and do work hard on the backbenches. And actually in opposition, I'm very concerned because our democracy only works when we have a decent opposition holding a party to account. An opposition and the government and an opposition is how our democracy works at its best. And if we have an opposition where people are leaving because they do not believe that the soul of the Conservative Party is going to be one that doesn't move even further to the right and then challenges the debate, the tone of debate, the tone of the rights that we have in this country, the tone of where we go next, then that's incredibly concerning. And I think that's what her departure signals, that she is not prepared to be in that hornet's nest.
I have a final question for you, Gina. Did you ever meet Theresa May one-on-one after the legal battle?
Not after. There was a play written about us.
There was. That's why I'm asking. There's an imaginary scene at the end. And I assumed it was imaginary.
No. We were both called Bloody Difficult Women, which is the name of the play. But I didn't know. That is an imaginary scene at the end of the play. But I did meet her when I was at CSJ and we were working on the Modern Day Slavery Act and Bill. And she was focused on that legislation in every single meeting and would not give up. And I would say her attention to detail was incredible.
I couldn't really comment on whether she was mistreated because she was a woman. I'm aware that women are the ones who can speak with more authority about that. I think it's simply a matter of not being very good at her job. And I think she probably meant well. She, by chance, she happens to have gone to my children's school. And I can, to a certain degree, have some sympathy with her.
Do you mean as a student?
She was a student as a secondary student.
That was a grammar school, right? She used to make... Was it not a grammar school?
It was, but it's become a comprehensive.
Right.
But that's by the by. I do feel sorry for her. I think she was a bad judge of character. She probably wasn't very good with people. It's curious seeing that since she's been liberated from the job, she's actually proven to be more socially competent and she can actually hold an audience now. Yeah. But I think she drew people like Nick Timothy into her circle, and I think that was a mistake because I think a lot of advisors have their own agendas and put ideology before the country. And I think her big mistake in terms of how she'll be remembered was Lancaster House speech, where she said that her policy was to leave not only the European Union, which the referendum, some people said the referendum authorised her to do. We could argue about that forever, but it certainly never authorised anyone to bring forward a hard Brexit. And the customs union single market were never mentioned. And she thought by doing that she would earn brownie points with people like Peter Bone, of whom, of course, we have heard quite a lot more recently.
We have, haven't we?
And people like that,
disgraced
I think...
Peter Bone, I think we can describe him as that. I think that's fair.
The very same.
The disgraced
and I think if you try to throw red meat to people like that, then, first of all, you may get bitten, but secondly, they want more. And when she committed herself to that hard Brexit, they then pocketed that particular win, and they wanted her to go further. And, every attempt she made after that to compromise was bound to be portrayed as a betrayal. She wasn't letting the people down, but, she was seen as letting down the people in her party who had a very clear destructive agenda. And we know what's happened since. And we know how damaging, and obviously you've spoken about this many times, how damaging the kind of Brexit that she initiated has turned into. Obviously Boris Johnson took the next step, but if she hadn't actually set the groundwork for that, then who knows what might have happened. Because it would have been quite plausible to say, yes, the people voted to leave the European Union. We will see what we can do, looking at the evidence, looking at what's good for the country, and taking account of the fact that it was a narrow margin. We will leave the European Union, but do so in the least harmful way possible, and see it as a damage limitation exercise. That, I think, is where she failed completely. And then, of course, one can say, just speaking against myself, when I say that she was a person with probity, I think it is to her discredit how she handled the Windrush affair.
Yeah.
You talked about it earlier. Amber Rudd was thrown under the bus, and that should never have happened. Because what Amber Rudd took the blame for was really something that Theresa May had done and should have taken responsibility for.
Although I could be wrong because my memory is hazy. I'm at that age, Peter. But my vague memory is that Amber Rudd, in the wake of that, attempted to throw the civil service under the bus for the Windrush scandal. I mean, I could be wrong, but I'll try and do a little search during the news, but that could be the case. May I ask you a quick question? Because you raised something very important, I think, right at the beginning of this, when you said, Theresa May went to the school that my children went to, and Theresa May herself has reflected on the fact that and you're quite right, so she went... She started her school career at that school when it was grammar school, and then during, I think, the time she was there, it became comprehensive. She has spoken about how she felt carved out from the Conservative Party by a bunch of men who were old Harrovians, old Etonians, the Bullingdon Club boys, right? And that there has been historically a kind of discrimination within the upper echelons of the Tory party between those young people who are educated in state schools and those who are men educated in male boarding schools. Since your children went to the same school, do you think there could be an element of truth in that?
I think it's very difficult to see how John Major could rise to the top now. I mean, he did in his time. And he was not a public school boy, and he had a very humble beginning, and he managed to get to the top in the Conservative Party of that time. I think it's been really very disappointing to see how much backwards they've slipped, and how the public school people are now in the ascendant there. I wouldn't attempt to defend that for a second. I think it's deeply to their discredit.
The fact that she was a woman, she was treated differently by men in her own party. When she became Prime Minister, she had the challenge of trying to deal with the sycophants who surrounded Boris Johnson. I think the fact that she was a woman, they went after her a lot more than they would if it was a man who was in her position. I thought she was an able Prime Minister. I didn't agree with her policies as Home Secretary. I think she was an awful Home Secretary, some of the things that she brought in. But I think on the basis that she was a woman, I think she was treated awfully. But it isn't unique to the Conservative Party. Bearing in mind the Conservatives have had 3 female leaders. None of them have lost a general election. They've always been ousted by men. That's politics in general, because the Labour Party, shameful as it is to say, have never had a leader. The Lib Dems had a female leader, and she was ousted. So I think the problem is with Westminster and women in the very top job.
Robin in Whitehaven, you raised some very excellent points. We've lost you, I think, because the line was very poor. But talking about the Lib Dems there, you say that they, of course, had a female leader. You described her as being ousted, and you implied that was because she was a woman.